Welcome to Startup Coffee TV. I'm your host, John Narroway. This is episode number 1. This is the first time we're doing it, and we're here from Hub Culture in beautiful Bermuda. And I'm joined today by Stan Stoliker from Hub Culture. Welcome, Stan.
Hey, John. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having us here in Bermuda. This is wonderful. The best location we've ever done for this show on episode 1.
And there have been like season after season.
Yeah.
This is quite a special place and a great place to be working this summer. On the things and the technologies that we work on.
Great. So just unpack a little bit for me. What is Hub Culture?
Yeah, and where are we, right?
Right.
So this is the Hub Culture Innovation Campus. It's a pop-up innovation campus and beach club that we've created here in Bermuda for the summer. And it serves the needs of the Hub Culture community, first and foremost. And it's really an expression of the community in a physical form. So Hub Culture as a company is one of the, it's really an old technology company now, I hate to say. It's been around since 2002, and we launched one of the first social networks back then. And it's always been geared around experience. And so we create these hubs or these pavilions or campuses around the world so that our members have a place to connect and collaborate.
Okay. So an example of that connection was, you've been here for almost 2 months now, but last week, for example, you had, some of the best minds around Ethereum and blockchain here.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what happened with that event?
Yeah, so we're really focused on gathering influencers first and foremost, and the hubs around the world, we've done 30 of them, believe it or not, in places as diverse as Beijing or Ho Chi Minh City, Venice, Davos at the World Economic Forum, LA, Miami. And what we do is we gather influencers at those places and help people connect and work on either big ideas, kind of impact, or in some ways just pushing their own agendas forward. And in the Ethereum space, we had a theme week last week focused on Ethereum, and we brought in some of the top minds who were working on developing Ethereum, along with some of the people who were investing in it, or just even people interested in the topic of what it is, and we gathered them under the banner of this theme week. And then last week was oceans, and we looked at ocean innovation and work around oceans. This week it's healers and empaths. So we have one of the top empaths in the world who's here, along with Reiki healers and craniosacral therapists, and just different people, and they're kind of colliding and mixing and engaging with each other. And then what's fun is like actually mixing those different disciplines across each other. So we had an artificial intelligence week where we're developing work for our AI. But during that week, there was also a Qigong therapist who was here, and he was talking about these kind of very soft aspects of like humanity and how they could impact the development of AI. And so in this weird way, you get these very diverse kind of streams within the conversation that make a hub very cool. Usually a hub would last for just a few days or a few weeks. Sometimes they've lasted a couple years. This one is lasting for really 3 months over the summer.
Right. And you have hubs all around the world that you put on for a couple of weeks, such Davos.
Right. So we've been in Davos for 10 years at the World Economic Forum, and there we're very focused on being the center of the circular economy with a space called the Ice House, which means Innovation for the Circular Economy House, which is built on top of the hub. And we've been there now 10 years working in Davos around some of these topics and conversations. And then, like during UN General Assembly Week in New York and Climate Week, we're very active there. We do a wide range of activities. We've done many hubs in many places.
So it's an amazing, I don't know what to call it. It's an amazing culture that you're creating, actually.
Well, I like to think of it as a kind of virtual country. I mean, it's a little bit ambitious to say that.
You have your own currency, right? So,
yeah. Well,
maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's intriguing as well.
Thank you. Well, I mean, okay, so at the end of the day, if you look at like near futurists, Neil Stephenson, who's one of my favorite authors, people who really work in the realm of the near future, but like far enough away that you can't really predict what's going to happen. The idea that entities or communities will emerge that replicate some of the form of the nation state and provide services to their audience or citizens is not that unrealistic, especially when you take into account the development of the virtual world and the idea that there will be virtual states.
Right.
And so I think what we're really looking at over a long period of time with Hub is how do you build the core foundations of a virtual state? And so we have real estate in the sense of spaces where people can physically gather. We have intentional community. We developed one of the first digital currencies, Ven, which is used within the community. And then through that, we went to effectively identity and what we call self-sovereign identity, which is Hub ID. So you now have a passport, you have an economy, you have a currency. And then really the AI, I think, is going to become the century.
Right.
Because I think over the long run, these types of highly participative communities will need some form of AI to assist them. And that's a 10-year goal for us, but the AI, I think, is where I'm very focused right now.
Do you think AI, in terms of like almost a governance through AI?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
So already we're doing governance through the AI. So we launched the AI in January, and we immediately gave it the keys to the bank, which was kind of scary. But so he's now the banker, Zeek, Zeek.ai.
Zeek is your AI. So you had to give your AI a name to personify it, or?
Yeah, well, one of the funny things with AI is really just a bundle of APIs at the end of the day. But AIs work functionally better, it seems, if they are encapsulated in something that humans can interact with. So I've heard a lot of people talking about AI as the new UI.
Right.
So if we're going to move away from typing on the screen on our phone and it's going to become kind of immersive, you're going to have to interact with some kind of machine personality. And so we're enabling our users to create their own virtual personas within Hub to kind of act as a virtual agent for you. But we're also building a virtual agent for Hub itself. And so Zeek is that virtual agent, and it's doing three things right now. It's a banker, so it's delivering Ven to and from members. It's a postman, so it's delivering messages to and from other members. It's a DJ, because we built a radio station, and we're running 24-hour radio now. And the idea is that the AI will pay DJs for when their music is selected. So we had to build a program that allowed Zeek to select music from a repository that was being created from our network of DJs. So, it's a DJ, it's a banker, it's a postman, and what we're trying to do is teach it. So we're building a blockchain on Ethereum, and the blockchain is called the Open Audit Initiative. And the idea is that you could take transactions like Ven transactions and put them there as a kind of receipt, but also to take data and put it on this blockchain as a repository for Zeek, which is kind of we call it a blockchain brain. So the idea would be that you can ask Zeek a question, the question and the answer then get saved onto the blockchain, and at some point if the questions get repeated or there are various answers, you'd use consensus to form some form of response. It's still very vague because we're very early on it, but we're building the foundations.
And you did something very interesting just recently where I believe you did the sort of first currency transfer to a non-person. Is that did I get that right?
Right.
Kind of like
So
a machine-to-machine payment.
So I think machine-to-machine payments are going to be a $1 trillion business. They're already well on their way to being something because of the IoT and the size of IoT. So here's the bottom line. There are 7 billion people on the planet, and we could expect that most of the 7 billion will have some form of financial account by 2020. And it may not be a traditional bank account, but it could be a digital currency account or some form of financial means of participation in the system, which is fabulous.
Right.
But beyond that, you have entities, of which there are probably something like to the order of 20 to 30 million entities in the world. But beyond that, there could be 200 billion objects that could be enabled with sensors and machines. And you could apply digital currency accounts to those 200 billion objects and massively, massively grow the economy, because instead of having 7 billion, economic acting nodes, you grow that, what's 7 by 200? Like many-fold.
Right, 140 billion. Yeah.
So we said, okay, so the way to do that is we have to build account capabilities, not just people in Hub, but entities, hubs themselves, so a group of soccer moms could have a hub, and then objects. So our Volkswagen, which we bought on eBay, is now the first, automobile to hold a digital currency account. So we paid the Volkswagen some vet. It's a 1974 Volkswagen.
Yeah.
We call him Carl because he kind of grumbles. But it's an old Volkswagen convertible. And what's hilarious is that I was in Bali and I met another guy at this villa that we were staying at, and he had a similar Volkswagen, but it's 2 years older. It's a 1976 Volkswagen Safari, and it's orange instead of white. And so he set up an account for his car, and then our car paid some VEN to his car. And this is really just a kind of
proof of concept at this point.
Yeah.
But so are you saying in the future then that
But I did pay the guy for my ride. My car paid my
right? So
other
if you kind of take that into the real world examples of
well,
Uber,
for
let's say-
autonomous driving, it's going to
autonomous
be
driving.
huge.
It's like you don't pay the driver, you're paying your car. So
Yeah, you
therefore
won't
the
pay the
car
driver,
actually
you'll
has a
pay the
bigger
car.
value. So over time, the car actually creates more value, possibly than the worth of the car off the lot.
Exactly. And I mean, the implications are massive for transportation. We're actually looking at it here in Bermuda. We're actually looking at enabling van accounts for all the buses here. So we just got to figure out if we can get a trial done with the Bermuda government. But imagine if when you board the bus, instead of paying the bus, you would pay the bus, right? Or
But
paying the
instead-
bus driver.
right.
Right? So you paid some digital currency, the bus would collect some amount of digital currency across its route, and then it would either hold that revenue or pay that revenue over to a beneficial owner.
Right. So these are really big ideas. So take me back a little bit. Tell me about where did this all start?
Well, I like to think I'm very youthful, but I'm really older than I think. So I was one of the first bloggers, and I was very lucky. I was at Time Warner. I was at Time Warner for a long time, and I was given one of the first blogs in the world on CNN in 1999. And I wrote this column, and they're like, just file every Friday. And so I was like, okay. And so I literally just wrote about whatever was going on, and I was living in Asia at the time. And out of that emerged this idea. The column was called Culture on Demand. And out of Culture on Demand, I got a book deal to write a book about the new global culture that was emerging, which I saw it very much as people who could come from anywhere in the world, but who had more in common with other people based on their interests and proximity. So it wasn't about your neighbor anymore. You could be from Mumbai and have more in common with a person from Sao Paulo, than anyone else. And so that's how hub culture was born, and this idea of hubs, and what the culture was around that. And then from that now, the concept of hubs have infected society. I mean, you look everywhere now, and everything is thought of in terms of hubs. But hub culture was the first to describe that. And before that book, the only thing that was a hub was an airline. You had airline hubs. And that's kind of where the idea grew from. But that book explained it. And then we started working on spaces. We did the first hubs as spaces in the world. And now, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of different companies who are building their own hubs. Right. And it's exciting to see that.
So the first time you proposed this to somebody as, when you're, early days as a founder, what were the reactions? Because obviously this was a pretty big idea, and, your thoughts around it were obviously very much towards the future, and you could see where things were going. But obviously in 2001, things weren't so rosy in the tech world.
Yeah.
How did you kind of keep that going? How did you maintain that?
We threw parties. Throwing parties is a good way to get people to engage with the social network. I actually have one moment in my career with Hub that sticks out so vividly in my mind. And I actually, when I talk to younger entrepreneurs or I mentor them, this is one thing that I often like to tell this story because I think it's a really important thing to hear. So, your idea of success is not what somebody else's idea of success is. And what matters is how on track you are to your idea of success. I'm not a big believer in pivots. We have been told to pivot a million times, and I never pivoted because I believed in what we were doing, and I found ways to financially enable myself not to be forced to pivot. And we're lucky because we have a great group of investors who have believed in the long-term vision of what we're doing. But I remember after we launched VEN in 2007, it was probably now 2008 or 9, And I got this meeting with a hedge fund, and I was so excited because I'm like, wow, like I'm in New York, and I go to this building over the Apple store at Fifth Avenue, and I go up to the top of the thing, and I walk out, and there is this killer boardroom overlooking all of Central Park. And I sit down, and I wait for this meeting with this hedge fund, and I sit down, and I'm like, yes, so we have a digital currency. It's like really the first digital currency in the world, and it's backed by this mix of assets, and it's linked to carbon, and so it's green. And the guy just looked at me, and he was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. No, why would anyone want to use something other than the dollar? And get out of my office, basically. And so the meeting lasted maybe 6 minutes. I got up and had to leave and go back down the elevator. And so the guy, from that guy's point of view, the meeting was a total failure. Like, there was nothing he saw of interest. He didn't see how big, that's a $120 billion business now for digital currency.
And it's just starting.
Yeah,
just
it
starting,
is.
Right?
It is. It'll be a $1 trillion business. But what was great about that was, like, he didn't know what my point of view was. And my point of view was like, oh, wow, I got a meeting with a hedge fund to talk about a currency that we created. That was such a milestone for me. And even though it resulted in nothing financially happening, the fact that I got into the door meant that for the rest of the year, whenever I was in a meeting, I could casually drop that we had met with, this hedge fund in New York.
Right.
And so I guess the point is like what one person's idea of success is doesn't have to be your idea of success, and you should own your successes, because you know what? Now we have dozens of hedge funds that hold Venn, right? So we got there eventually. We didn't get there on that day, but every step is a step on your journey or your path. And if you believe in what you're doing and you continually work on it, I do think you'll eventually get to somewhere. It may not be where you think you want to be, but you'll get somewhere.
It's a common theme amongst, the really great ideas out there. On paper, when they were first presented, sound absolutely crazy. Like, we're going to rent out spare rooms in our house to complete strangers. And, 15 years ago...
I was really early on Airbnb. I always thought that was a great idea.
Great idea. But a lot of people are like, that's a crazy idea.
Yeah.
Or, we're going to displace the taxi industry with Uber.
Well, I mean, look at right now. I mean, if I talk to people often about ICOs, which are the hot thing this summer, and literally ICOs didn't exist for practical purposes at the end of 2016. Today, ICOs, in second quarter, ICOs were bigger than venture. No one could have expected, I didn't even expect that, right? And people are only just figuring out now that ICOs brought in more money than venture in 2016, and how are they going to react to that? Or sorry, in 2017. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict. And what I've found incredibly frustrating is that we have often thought that we were very early, and we've been first on many things and never the biggest. We were early on social network, we were early on digital currency, we were early on digital identity. We're not that early on AI, but we're working on it. But what's interesting is that we've often, not been radical enough. Because if you look at digital currency, Venn was considered radical until Bitcoin came along, and that made Venn seem very conservative. And then Ethereum came along after Bitcoin, and now Bitcoin looks kind of conservative compared to what Ethereum is doing.
It's so reminiscent of like the Web 1.0, right? So it was like, Alta Vista and Netscape, and then like something comes along that's a little bit better and more features, and then eventually we got to Google. And,
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how that stuff pans out, because the revenue to cash influx ratio is way more out of whack. I mean, it's like if you look at the numbers, the amount of money that's flown into it relative to the amount of benefit that's come out of it does not line up, and it points the way towards some kind of extremely radical correction.
Right.
But the difference is that what's being created now are things that replace the web strategies of those eras. So what happens if you have decentralized search? Well, Google's 50 billion. Like, what happens if you could disrupt Google with blockchain, right? That starts to get really interesting.
Yeah.
Already Status is trying to disrupt WhatsApp. They raised 70 million in like a few days, and then the last I looked, it was trading at 155. So the value of the tokens that they issued doubled after their crowd sale. So you need a lot of money to compete at a big scale these days. Less than 100 million, I think means that it's hard to really compete. But it's also, what's really scary about it is that I think it kind of depends on which side of the river you're on looking at this stuff. If you're on the fiat currency side of the river, you say, wow, Bitcoin went from 5 cents to $3,000. Bitcoin has appreciated massively, right? But if you're on the Bitcoin side of the river,
Right.
what you're seeing is that the US dollar went from $1 to like less than a cent, right? And so that's a very interesting, different perspective to look at it at. Are we actually seeing a fundamental devaluation of fiat, or are we seeing a fundamental inflation of digital assets? And that's quite scary, because I think as it continues to accelerate, the balance of power may become a little bit harder to determine.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, conscious of time, you're a busy guy. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Down below in this video, there'll be comments. So throw some questions at us, and I'm sure Stan will jump in and answer some of the questions in the comment section. So thank you very much.
Do that.
Thanks again.
Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks for having coffee.
Yeah.
Right.
Ice cold coffee.
Ice cold coffee on the beach. Can't beat it. Thank you very much.
8 minutes if you want to slip in another question and edit it later.
Sure. Okay. Love to ask you this one.
You want to ask me another
I
question?
want to ask you one question.
Okay.
Who's your mentor?
Who's my mentor? That's a great question. I have a couple of mentors.
Well, I won't ask you which one's your favorite, because
I know, but
who's your favorite child?
Well, one person that comes to mind is Bill McDonough, William McDonough, who is the head of McDonough Innovation, and he's actually one of the world's leading architects and the father of the Cradle to Cradle movement. Mm-hmm. His book came out the same year my book did, but Bill's a little more established, and he really is the father of Cradle to Cradle, and his work is amazing. And so there's two things I really respect about him. One, he spends a lot of time with me and has been a big guide. And he actually focuses me on this. I have a little bracelet here, and it says excellence, right?
Oh, cool.
And it's kind of my mantra. And so this idea of excellence is something that Bill is really, really good at. He's extremely excellent in what he does, and he won't do something unless he can do it in an excellent way. I tend to be a little more haphazard, and I'm like, I'll do it because it's theoretically possible to do it, regardless of whether or not it comes out to be excellent. And so I'm learning a lot from him about actually really diligently making sure that what you do is excellent, because the reality is that these days, if you're not excellent, if you're not really excellent, you literally cannot compete, because somebody else is excellent, and increasingly it's winner take all. So you have to be excellent just to survive.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks again.